The Night Watch at Riverside Manufacturing is narrated by Frank, a 60-year-old security guard sharing his terrifying experience from 1987. Let's begin.
I've been a security guard for 37 years now, and I'm telling you this story because I'm retiring next month. My wife says I should let it go, that what happened at Riverside Manufacturing Company was just my mind playing tricks after too many long nights. But I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and I know why that building sits empty today. Chain-link fence rusting around its perimeter, with no trespassing signs that nobody needs to post because nobody would go near it anyway. It was the fall of 1987. I'd just turned 43 and I'd been working security for about 15 years by then. Nothing fancy, just honest work keeping an eye on warehouses, office buildings, the occasional construction site. My knees were still good, my eyes were sharp, and I could still walk the rounds without needing to sit down every 20 minutes like some of the younger guys. When the posting came up for the night watchman position at Riverside Manufacturing, I jumped at it. The pay was almost double what I was making at the shopping center, and it was just one building to monitor instead of a whole complex. Riverside had been producing machine parts since the 1940s, and while they'd scaled down operations considerably over the years, they still had expensive equipment and inventory that needed protecting. I met with the site manager, a thin, nervous man named Walter Grisham, on a Thursday afternoon. The building was a massive brick structure, 3 stories high, and taking up nearly a full city block. The windows on the ground floor had been bricked up years ago, Walter explained, after some break-ins in the 70s. The upper floors still had windows, but they were covered with heavy wire mesh. "We run a skeleton crew during the day now," Walter said as he showed me around. "Maybe 20 people total. Last shift leaves at 6, first shift arrives at 7 in the morning. You'll be here from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 5 nights a week, Monday through Friday." The place had that particular smell of old industrial buildings, machine oil, metal filings, concrete dust, and something else I couldn't quite place. Something musty and old, like the inside of a trunk that hadn't been opened in decades. "You'll do 4 rounds a night," Walter continued, handing me a ring of keys that must have weighed 3 pounds. "Once at 11, 1, 3, and 5. Rest of the time you're in the guard station by the front entrance. We have a time clock system. You'll punch these stations with this key." He showed me a brass key attached to a leather strap. "1 on each floor, 1 in the basement. That's how we know you're doing your rounds." "Basement?" I asked. His expression changed, just for a moment. Something flickered across his face. Was it worry? Fear? But then it was gone, replaced by his professional manager's smile. "Old storage area, hardly used anymore, but company policy says we need to check it. Don't worry, lights work fine down there. Just a little dusty is all." He showed me the guard station, a small room just inside the main entrance with a desk, a chair, a coffee maker, and a small black and white television. There was a logbook where I was supposed to note anything unusual, a telephone that connected directly to the police station, and a flashlight the size of a billy club. "Previous guard quit without much notice," Walter said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Personal reasons, but we've never had any real trouble here. It's a quiet place, boring really. Sometimes the pipes make noise and the building settles. You might hear what sounds like footsteps, but it's just the old wood floors expanding and contracting. Pay no mind to it." I should have asked more questions. I should have wondered why he felt the need to explain away sounds I hadn't even heard yet. But I was thinking about that doubled salary, about how my daughter Linda was looking at colleges, about how my wife Martha had been talking about finally taking that trip to see her sister in Arizona. So I said yes. My first night was a Tuesday in October. I arrived at 9:30 to get oriented, and Walter was there waiting for me. He showed me how to lock up after he left, how to arm the alarm system on the executive offices on the 3rd floor, and how to reset it for my rounds. "Remember," he said as he prepared to leave, "rounds at 11, 1, 3, and 5. Punch the time clock at each station. If you see anything unusual, call the police first, then call this number." He handed me a card with a phone number written in pencil. "That's my home number, but honestly, you won't have any trouble. Just stay awake, do your rounds, and the night will pass before you know it."
After he left, I settled into the guard station. I'd brought a thermos of coffee, a turkey sandwich Martha had made for me, and a paperback Western novel. The building was quiet, that deep, heavy quiet you only get in large, empty spaces. I could hear the hum of the overhead lights, the distant clunk and hiss of the heating system kicking on. At 11 o'clock, I set out on my first round. The ground floor was mostly the manufacturing area, long rows of machines sitting silent in the semi-darkness. I'd left the main corridor lights on, but the rest of the floor was lit only by the red glow of exit signs and the occasional security light. My footsteps echoed on the concrete floor as I walked to the time clock station near the back of the building. I punched it with the brass key, and the mechanism made a satisfying clunk. The second floor was offices and storage, desks in neat rows, filing cabinets, shelves stacked with boxes of documents. Everything was still and normal. I punched the time clock station near the center of the floor and moved on. The 3rd floor was executive offices and the company archives. Fancier furniture, wood paneling, photographs on the walls showing the factory in its heyday, hundreds of workers, production lines running full tilt. I punched the clock and headed for the stairs to the basement. That's when I first felt it. That sensation of being watched. You know the feeling, like someone's eyes are on the back of your neck. I turned around, shining my flashlight down the hallway. Nothing but empty offices and that long corridor stretching back toward the stairs. "Just the building settling," I said aloud, repeating Walter's words. My voice sounded small in that empty space. The basement stairs were narrow and steep, enclosed by concrete walls painted an industrial green that had faded and chipped over the decades. A single bulb lit the stairwell, and it flickered occasionally, making the shadows jump. The basement was vast. It extended under the entire building, a maze of storage rooms, old equipment, and support pillars. The ceiling was low, maybe 7 feet, and the air was noticeably colder than upstairs. The time clock station was near the bottom of the stairs, thankfully, and I punched it quickly, eager to get back upstairs. That's when I heard it. A sound from deeper in the basement. A scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across concrete. I froze, my hand on the brass key, my breath suddenly loud in my ears. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone down here?" The scraping stopped. Silence pressed in around me, broken only by the drip of water somewhere in the darkness. I shined my flashlight into the basement, the beam cutting through the gloom, illuminating old crates and machinery covered with dusty tarps. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. "Pipes," I told myself. "Just the pipes. Or maybe something fell. Old building. Things shift." I went back upstairs, back to the guard station, and poured myself a cup of coffee. My hands were shaking slightly, but I attributed that to the cold in the basement. The 1 o'clock round was uneventful. The 3 o'clock round was the same. By the time I did my 5 o'clock round, the sky outside the mesh-covered windows was just beginning to lighten with the first hint of dawn.
When the day shift started arriving at 7, I'd never been so happy to see other people. "How was your first night?" asked one of the machinists, a heavy-set man with gray hair and oil-stained hands. "Quiet," I said. "Very quiet." He nodded, but something in his expression made me think he wanted to say more. Instead, he just clapped me on the shoulder and headed inside. The second night was worse. Everything went fine until the 3 a.m. round. The ground floor, second floor, and third floor were all normal. But when I got to the basement stairs, every instinct in my body screamed at me not to go down. The light in the stairwell was out. I stood at the top of the stairs, shining my flashlight down into the darkness. The beam seemed weaker somehow, struggling to penetrate the gloom. "Just a burnt bulb," I muttered. "Just a burnt bulb." I made my way down carefully, one hand on the rail, my flashlight beam bouncing with each step. The cold hit me like a wave when I reached the bottom, much colder than it had been the night before, cold enough that I could see my breath. I punched the time clock quickly, the metallic clunk echoing through the basement. I was just turning to go back upstairs when I heard it again. That scraping sound, but this time it was accompanied by something else. Footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps coming from somewhere in the darkness. "Who's there?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is security. Identify yourself." The footsteps stopped, but now I could hear breathing. Heavy, labored breathing, like someone who'd been running hard or who was very, very old. I swung my flashlight toward the sound. The beam caught something, just for a second, a shape, tall and thin, standing between two support pillars about 30 feet away. Then it was gone, as if it had stepped backward into the darkness. I didn't wait. I ran up those stairs as fast as my legs could carry me, my heart pounding, my breath coming in gasps. I slammed the stairwell door behind me and stood in the third-floor hallway, hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath. "Get it together, Frank," I told myself. "You're acting like a scared kid. There's probably a homeless person down there, someone who snuck in before you started your shift." But I knew that wasn't right. I knew what I'd seen. That shape had been wrong somehow, too tall, too thin, and the way it had moved, stepping backward into darkness that my flashlight should have penetrated, that wasn't natural. I considered calling the police, but what would I tell them? That I heard noises and saw a shadow? They'd think I was a jumpy old fool, and Walter would probably fire me for creating a fuss over nothing.
So I went back to the guard station and didn't mention it in the logbook. I wrote, "All rounds completed, no incidents to report." I should have quit right then. I should have called Walter the next day and told him I was done, but I didn't. Part of me thought I was being foolish, letting my imagination run wild, and part of me, a bigger part than I want to admit, needed that money. The third night, I brought my old service revolver from my time in the Army. I know it was against company policy, but after what I'd experienced, I wasn't going into that building unarmed. The 11 and 1 o'clock rounds were normal. At 3 a.m., I stood at the top of the basement stairs for a full 5 minutes, steeling myself to go down. The light was working again, which should have been a comfort, but somehow made it worse. Someone or something had changed that bulb. I descended slowly, my hand near my hip where the revolver was tucked into my belt. The basement was still cold, but not as brutally cold as the night before. I punched the time clock and was turning to leave when I noticed something I'd missed before. There was a door at the far end of the basement, a heavy metal door painted the same faded green as the walls. I'd somehow overlooked it on the previous nights, or maybe I'd dismissed it as just another storage room. But now I could see that it had multiple locks and a sign that read, "Restricted Area, Authorized Personnel Only." I should have left it alone. I should have gone back upstairs and forgotten about it. But something drew me toward that door, a curiosity that overpowered my fear. I tried several keys from my ring before finding one that fit. The locks were stiff with disuse, but they eventually turned. The door swung open with a groan that seemed far too loud in the quiet basement. Beyond the door was another set of stairs heading down, a sub-basement I'd known nothing about. The air that wafted up from below was ancient and foul, like a tomb that had been sealed for centuries. I descended. The sub-basement was older than the rest of the building, I could tell immediately. The walls were rough stone instead of concrete, the floor uneven and damp. There was no electric lighting down here, only my flashlight beam cutting through absolute darkness. The space opened up into a large room, maybe 40 feet across, with a vaulted ceiling supported by thick stone pillars. Along the walls were what looked like old workbenches, and scattered across the floor were tools and equipment I didn't recognize. Everything was covered in decades, maybe centuries of dust and decay. But in the center of the room was something that made my blood run cold. A circle, maybe 15 feet in diameter, carved or painted into the stone floor. And inside the circle were symbols I'd never seen before. Strange, angular shapes that hurt my eyes to look at. Around the circumference of the circle were what looked like old stains, dark brown stains that I instinctively knew were blood. Candles surrounded the circle, dozens of them, melted down to stumps, their wax forming grotesque sculptures on the stone floor. I stood there, my flashlight playing across this nightmare scene, trying to process what I was seeing. This was under Riverside Manufacturing, under a factory that had been built in the 1940s. But this room was older, much older. That's when I heard the voice. It came from everywhere and nowhere, a whisper that seemed to emanate from the very stones themselves.
Finally. I spun around, my flashlight beam wild, trying to find the source. But there was nothing, just that vast, dark room and those horrible symbols on the floor. Finally, someone opens the door. "Who's there?" I shouted, my hand going to my revolver. Trapped. So long. Trapped. The temperature plummeted, my flashlight flickered and dimmed, and in the dying light, I saw it.
the shape from the basement, but now I could see it clearly. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that bent at wrong angles. Its face, if you could call it that, was a pale, elongated mask with hollow eyes and a mouth that was too wide, too full of teeth. It moved toward me, gliding across the stone floor without walking, its mouth opening wider and wider, that whisper growing louder, becoming a hiss, then a wail. I ran. I ran like I haven't run since I was young, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly, my breath burning in my lungs. I could hear it behind me, that scraping sound, those footsteps that weren't quite footsteps. I hit the stairs and took them 3 at a time, bursting through the metal door and slamming it behind me. I didn't stop running until I was back in the guard station. I grabbed the phone and called Walter's home number with shaking hands. It rang 6 times before he answered, his voice thick with sleep. "Walter, it's Frank. I found something. In the basement. There's a sub-basement and something down there." "You went down there? You opened the restricted door?" "Yes, but Walter, there's something." "Get out." His voice was sharp, urgent. "Get out of the building right now. Don't go back in. I'm calling the police. Just get out, Frank." "But now!" I ran. I left my thermos, my novel, everything. I just ran to my car and drove away as the sun was starting to rise. I didn't stop shaking until I was home, with Martha's arms around me, safe in my own kitchen. The police investigated. Walter was there. Some other men in suits that I didn't recognize. They wouldn't let me go back inside. They took my keys, gave me a check for 2 weeks' pay, and told me my services were no longer needed. The factory closed within a month, permanently. They said it was due to structural concerns and environmental issues. The workers were laid off, the machinery sold, the building sat empty.
But I did some research. I went to the library and dug through old newspapers and city records. I found out that the land Riverside Manufacturing was built on had a darker history. In the 1890s, it had been the site of a factory that burned down, killing dozens of workers. Before that, in the early 1800s, there had been a church there, but not a normal church. A church that practiced something else, something dark. There were reports of disappearances, of rituals, of a preacher named Ezekiel Stone who claimed he could speak to angels, but who the locals suspected was speaking to something else entirely. The church had been torn down in 1823 after a mob burned it to the ground. But the sub-basement, that stone room with its circle and symbols, that had been there before the church. That had been there for a very, very long time. I never found out what exactly I saw in that sub-basement. I don't want to know. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that whisper in my dreams. Trapped, so long, trapped. And I wonder if it still is. If that metal door was enough to hold it. If the symbols in that circle were a summoning or a prison. I wonder if the next person who opens that door will be as lucky as I was to get away. I drive by the old Riverside Manufacturing building sometimes, even though my wife tells me I shouldn't. The fence is still there, rusting away. The no trespassing signs are faded and falling down. The windows are dark. But I swear, sometimes, late at night when I drive by, I can see a light in the basement windows, a faint, flickering light, like candlelight. And I know, deep in my bones, that something down there is still waiting, still hungry, still hoping for someone to open the door. I've told this story to you now because I need someone else to know. Because when I'm gone, someone needs to remember what's under that building. Someone needs to make sure that door stays closed. Some things, once imprisoned, should stay that way. Some doors are locked for a reason. And some buildings, no matter how empty they seem, are never truly abandoned. I learned that lesson during my 3 nights at Riverside Manufacturing, and it's a lesson that will stay with me until the day I die. God willing, that thing in the sub-basement will be trapped even longer, but somehow I doubt it. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is right, I swear I can still hear that whisper carried on the breeze from across town. Finally, someone opens the door, and I pray to God nobody ever does.
If you ever find yourself working night security, remember this. Some buildings have secrets buried deep in their foundations, secrets that were meant to stay buried. If you come across a locked door marked restricted, a basement level that isn't on the blueprints, or a room that feels wrong the moment you step inside, turn around, walk away. Some mysteries aren't worth solving. Some doors were locked for a reason. And sometimes the best thing a security guard can do is leave well enough alone. Trust your instincts. They might just save your life.